and he can start the recording. It's live on YouTube as well. Wish everybody a Chodesh Tov. Tonight we are beginning the month of Adar, and I hope it'll be a good, positive, happy month. Mishnichnas Adar Marbim L'Simcha. So we could use some good news, and we are going to discuss tonight, and there's a lot to talk about in this week's Parsha, which is very, very full. It's also Shabbat Shkalim. I think we'll leave that for next time. There's a lot to say about the Shkalim as well, but we'll concentrate on the Parsha. Mishpatim. It's remarkably, this is one of 19 consecutive Parshiot in the Torah, 29 consecutive Parshiot in the Torah, if and when Vayakel Pekude is read together as one Sedra, as it is this year, all of which begin with the letter Vav. If you don't believe me, check it out. Mishpatim also begins with the letter Vav. Don't be confused by the fact that the title Mishpatim begins with a Mem. Look at the first letter in each of these Parshiot, 29 in a row that begin with the letter Vav. But it's Dafka in this week's Parsha, in this Sedra, that Rashi comments on the Vav. And the Vav, by the way, is a word which means hook. One of my favorite trivia questions is a Hebrew word, a legitimate Hebrew word with 4 letters, all 4 of which are the same. And I've given you the clue to that when I talk about Vav. Right? The word uvavo and his hook. Vav, 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 vav. It's a real word. In any case, I always try to throw in a few trivias. But Rashi comments on the significance of this Parsha, starting with the Vav, and tells us that just as the 10 commandments in our previous Sedra of Yitro come from Hashem, so do the 53 mitzvot in this Sedra also emanate from the Almighty, as do all mitzvot. And therefore, the Vav is linking together last week's Parsha and this week's Parsha and all of these Parshiot, as a matter of fact. And it's also, says Rashi, the reason why the Beit HaMikdash and the Sanhedrin had to be located right next to one another. The emanation of Hashem's presence and the Sanhedrin that will legislate on Jewish law. The point of this, of course, is that we should not err by thinking that the big commandments, big in parentheses, such as lo tirtzach, do not murder, keep Shabbat, idolatry, we shouldn't think that those are the ones that God really cares about, and the other seemingly minor mitzvot are of much lesser importance. The fact is, and this is what Rashi is emphasizing, they're all hooked or linked together. They all have a divine origin and a power of their own, and it is not up to the individual to pick and choose what he deems to be of greater value. That's not a game that we should play. Yes, there are, different rewards or punishments based upon the mitzvah, but as Pirkei Avot tells us as well, be as careful with a quote unquote minor mitzvah as you are with a major mitzvah, and really don't try to even figure out what those are. So last week we set the stage of the mitzvot coming as an emanation from God, from the pathway to connect with Hashem in big letters, the Aseret HaDibrot. And now we begin the nuts and the bolts of halacha. It's kind of like, you have a TV set and you see that screen in front of you, but you know that there's also intricate wiring that is making the whole thing work. And so these 53 mitzvot immediately following the 10 commandments are an indication that there's a lot of wiring that goes into the Torah to make it complete. The pasuk says, Ela mishpatim asher tasim lifnehem. Hashem says to Moshe, these are the mishpatim, the laws, the judgments, which I am putting before you. And Rashi has a beautiful comment on that. And he says, Amar lo HaKadosh Baruch Hu LeMoshe, lo talel darcha lemor אשנה להם פרק והלכה ב' או ג' פעמים, עד שתהא סדורה בפיהם כמשנתה, ואינו מטריח עצמי להביא nam ta'amei hadavar. Don't just teach them by rote what are the commandments. It's not sufficient. They have to also understand what they're all about. Now, we know there are chukim that perhaps the reason is not readily apparent, but in general, it's not sufficient just to be able to quote the mitzvot or even necessarily to perform them. You have to go deeper, says Hashem to Moshe, and let Am Yisrael know what these are all about. What do they mean? What is the deeper significance? And indeed, Rav Moshe Feinstein has a beautiful comment in his Sefer on the Parsha, and he says, I draw a distinction between those people who are tzaddikim from the lips out and those who are tzaddikim from the lips in. From the lips out means they can quote you all of the laws, but have they internalized the meaning of those mitzvot? He says that's what we're striving for. Someone who is a tzaddik, it penetrates inside them. So we're going to try to draw some themes from these 53 psukim. And I suggest that the central theme revolves around mercy, compassion, sensitivity. That seems to connect a great majority of these mitzvot. And I'm going to just draw on a few of them to emphasize that point. And then I want to end with a bit of a surprise ending for you. First of all, where do we begin to enumerate and explain these 53 psukim? We are following to some extent the golden rule of Judaism. Now, you may know this in different forms, but the Gemara Shabbat Daf Lamed Aleph tells us what is the real golden rule of Judaism, and says in Aramaic, "De'alach snei lechavercha lo ta'avid." That which is hateful or distasteful to you, do not do to others. That's the golden rule. That's where it all begins. And so this parsha begins in no other place with the laws of slavery, how to treat slaves, or if you prefer, indentured servants, with fairness and not cruelty. We remember we were just coming off just a parsha ago when we were slaves, and we understand this golden rule so well. That which was hateful to us, to be enslaved by others, don't do it to others. Don't do it to someone else when you know how painful it was for you. So the commentators say that truthfully, in a sense, this type of indentured servitude was really a chesed. These were people essentially who had lost everything, had no means of support. Maybe they borrowed money, couldn't pay it back. Maybe their business folded. Maybe they stole money and they squandered it. And so they had no choice but to sell themselves. But although they are, in a sense, servants, you have to treat them with mercy, compassion. The Gemara says, if you have one pillow, it goes to the servant and not to the master. If you would strike and kill a servant, you can be executed for it. Not like the other types of slavery that we've heard where the master, the boss, has all the power and the servant literally has none. It's a different kind of servitude, more or less by necessity, but with compassion and with a certain mercy. And then there are so many other examples here about showing mercy and compassion. The pasuk says, "Im kesef talveh et ami." If you will lend, says God, if you will lend money to my nation. And that's the accepted translation, is we take that im and we say it means when you lend money to one of my people. And then it goes on to say, do not charge him interest. But of course, the commentators say, if you meant when, why didn't you say when? Why didn't you say ka'asher kesef talvetami, which means when you lend? Why the word im, which means if, usually? What's the if? Is it, do you have a choice? You have to lend money. That's a mitzvah. It's a commandment. So it should have said when. Why does it say if? As if it's our choice. So there's a beautiful commentary on this word im, this little tiny word of 2 letters, but it teaches us something, that yes, we have to lend someone money, but too often people, as soon as they see a poor person approaching, they already start to mentally prepare the ifs, the ands, the buts as to why they don't want to give. If I was just a little bit wealthier, I would give you. If everyone else gives, then I'll give you too. If the cause, in my opinion, is worthwhile, I'll give you. If the person collecting is a Zionist or is a Haredi or is secular, pick the one you want, then I would give. But the Torah is telling us that even with all your ifs, you still have to give. It's not a question of you always standing in judgment, because then there's no end to it. Although you always have to do triage, there's only a limited amount of tzedakah, of resources that we have. Nevertheless, don't always be looking for an excuse not to give, all the ifs. I always like to say, and there's a story about somebody who always finds a reason not to give, but then someone comes collecting, as we say, chasen kaligel, collecting for a poor bride and groom. And they come to this fellow and he says, no, I don't want to give. And they say to him, even this, you have a problem? What's your problem? And he says, I don't like the shidduch. Well, it's not his place to judge that. You still have to give. I always like to quote one of my rabbis, Rabbi Kaganoff, Zichrono Livracha, from Chicago, who did this play on words with if. He says, life contains within it the word if. And so there are many people that go through life always regretting the things they did. If I would have moved it to this city, if I would have married this person, if I would have taken this job, and they always have regrets. But the Hebrew word for life is chaim, and chaim contains within it yud yud, the 2 letters of Hashem's name. A Jew always accepts life and says, at the end of the day, God is guiding me wherever I go. And as a result of that, I don't have to have any regrets. I know that this was what I was selected to do, and they don't have any ifs to plague them throughout life. The Torah tells us in another place that when we come upon a person struggling with their burden, even someone we regard as an enemy, we must assist that person in carrying his load. In fact, you have to help a person that you are, quote unquote, an enemy with or in dispute with, rather than before you help a friend. You have to go out of your way for such a person. That's the fine print of this mitzvah. And we are told that the Torah says you shall surely help him. But the words the Torah uses is azov ta'azov imo. Now, something seems not right here. It looks like maybe somebody made a mistake, because the word azov would seem to mean just the opposite. It means basically to leave him alone. Azor is to help someone, but azov can basically means to leave a person alone. We see this, for example, right? We have this pasuk right near the beginning of the Torah. Pasuk says, when Hashem creates man and finds a helpmate, he says, Al kain ya'azov ish et aviv et imo v'davak b'ishto, and so shall a man leave his mother and father and cling to his wife. So you see that Ya'azov is the same root as Azov. So why do we translate it here as to help or to assist? Azov tazov imo, to help the person who is struggling. So there's a beautiful idea that the highest form of helping someone is to get that person to the point where we can leave them alone because now they're independent. So they no longer are in need of our assistance. There's no greater tzedakah that you can do for someone than to raise them to where they're self-reliant. So the goal of helping another person is ultimately to leave them to their own efforts, because this will not only give them what they need, but it'll restore their sense of self-respect, along with that ability to financially survive. So, and that's why we say when the Rambam lists the levels of tzedakah, he says the highest level is to help an indigent person find gainful employment, and then they'll be on their own. So we see that this was not a slip of the tongue or a slip of the pen when the Torah wrote, Azov tazov imo. In a sense, it does mean you shall surely leave him, but it means you shall surely help him by helping him to become self-sufficient where he'll be on his own. He doesn't have to come back time after time to you. And of course, this is a syndrome that we see in the Jewish world today without getting into a deep discussion about it. But we see the fact that people are actually prevented from having a vocation, that they're constantly having to come to others and ask them when they should be independent if they're capable. Obviously, there's some people that aren't capable, but those who are capable and able-bodied and have a sound mind, they should have employment. All the great tzaddikim and sages that we read about, they all had some form of employment. They didn't actually want to take any money from anybody else. Rambam was a doctor, many doctors, by the way. Rambam and Sforno. Hillel was an architect. Rabbi Yochanan, a sandler, right? The shoemaker. There were so many. And again, this idea of maintaining your self-respect by being self-reliant. So here too, although we show mercy by giving the charity, the best thing you can really do for someone is to understand their situation and get them back on their feet. We're told there's a mitzvah, lo tonu. It's a very interesting mitzvah that says you shall not oppress. And there are many different forms of it. But essentially, the Torah is telling us that there are some elements of society, the most vulnerable, and you have to be protective of them. And you must be very, very careful that you don't do anything to harm them. And I want to just read that the psukim there, very, very fascinating when we're told this about this mitzvah of lo tonu. So the pasuk says, it begins, V'ger lo toneh v'lo tilchatzenu, a stranger, meaning a convert. Be careful of not oppressing. And what word does he use here? Either oppressing or causing that person pain. Ki gerim heitem be'eretz Mitzrayim, you are strangers in the land of Mitzrayim. And you have to, again, remember that golden rule. And then, kol almana v'yatom lo ta'anun. And a widow and an orphan in particular, be careful not to oppress them. Listen to the words of the pasuk. Im anei ta'aneh oto, ki im tza'ok yitzak elai. If you will oppress them so they cry out to me, shamoa eshma tza'akato, I will hear their cry. V'chara api, and says Hashem, I will get angry. V'arakti etchem b'charav, I will kill you with the sword. V'hayu neshechem almanot, I'll make your wives into widows, uvnechem yitomim, and your children into orphans. This is very, very powerful stuff. And so you can just hear it, that Hashem takes this very, very seriously. But the fascinating thing about this pasuk, if you heard it, and certainly if you read it, you notice something very, very dramatic. All the verbs are doubled. Listen again. Im aneh ta'aneh, ki im tza'ok yitzak, shamoa eshma. And this is, of course, not by coincidence. Doubling the words often means you're adding a sense of emphasis and urgency. But there's a there's another message being sent here, I think. While it's wrong to hurt or abuse any person, it's doubly serious when that person is already suffering from a severe loss. And you will compound it by doing something, cheating them, out of their money, or maybe mocking them, insulting them, whatever it may be. When you compound that trauma, it's truly hitting below the belt. And Hashem takes that very, very seriously. There's a story about a widow, and she takes her children to buy shoes. And when they come in to buy the shoes, the owner of the store, he gives the little children, there's a little daughter, maybe 3 or 4 years old, and he gives her a balloon and says, when they buy the shoes, and as she's leaving the store, he ties it around her wrist, but as she leaves the store, this little girl unties the balloon and lets it fly away. And the store owner gets very angry and says, "Why did you do that? I gave you that balloon as a gift and you just let it fly away." And she looks at the man and says, "Abba didn't get one. Daddy didn't get one." And he realizes that he never should have yelled at her. She misses her father, and he understands how vulnerable people are when they suffer a loss. There's another mitzvah here that it's very interesting. Someone steals an ox or a sheep, he has to pay back 5 times for the ox, 5 oxen, and we won't get there, and 4 times for the sheep. Why 5 and 4? It should be equal. 4 and 4, 5 and 5. So the Rashi says, and others, that it's a compensation for the fact that for the ox, he had to carry it. It's very visible to others. And there's a certain busha, there's a certain embarrassment that he suffered, even though he was a thief. And when, I'm sorry, that we had to carry the sheep. The ox he was able to lead, but the sheep he had to carry. And as a result of that, he suffered the embarrassment of people seeing him. And therefore the Torah even takes pity on somebody who's a thief and says, you know what? We have to have even compassion for that person, although they did something wrong and they have to pay back, but a little bit less than the person who stole the ox. And there are a lot of things in this Parsha as well that deal with justice. I'm not going to go into that now, but just to say that when you do justice, you're also showing some compassion because somebody was victimized, and the Torah is telling us there has to be some kind of payback. There has to be some kind of balancing of the scales, because we have to also take into account the person who was harmed and how badly they'll feel if no justice was done. I want to close with the last section. In a moment, we'll talk about it. The Sedra, our Sedra is basically showing Judaism's sensitive side, how we have to respond to the needs of the poor, the widow, the orphan, the disenfranchised, even the slaves, even members of the animal kingdom. But we are at Tselem Elokim. We are a shadow of God. And therefore, Hashem's actions will, by necessity, mirror our own. And that is a key to understanding a very bizarre, esoteric, mysterious, and seemingly unrelated closing section of our Sedra, the 24th parak. And it contains some mystifying episodes. And I want to just go over that with you and give you what I think is the explanation, because it's completely out of character with everything. Up till now, we've been doing commandment after commandment after commandment. And now we're telling a story. And it seems like this doesn't even belong in this Parsha. First, Hashem says, I'm sending an angel to protect you. Respect him, for my name is in him. Listen carefully to the words. I'm not going to read the Hebrew. You can do that yourself. But again, the angel, protect him. Respect him, for my name is in him. Then Moshe, Aaron, and the 70 elders, they ascend Har Sinai. and they have a dramatic encounter there with the Almighty. But in advance of their ascent, Moshe first performs an elaborate, mysterious ritual. He builds a mizbeach at the foot of the mountain with 12 pillars representing the 12 tribes. He then sends, quote, Na'arei b'nei Yisrael, the youth of Israel, and they bring offerings. What offerings do they bring? Olot. You know, the olah is completely burnt. It's a complete sacrifice, which then we're told turn into shlamim, peace offerings. That in itself is mysterious. The olah turns into, or the olot, into shlamim, peace offerings to God. Moshe then takes the blood of these offerings and he sprinkles half of it on the mizbeach, on the altar. And then after the nation takes the oath, and you know this, na'aseh v'nishma, we will do and we will obey. Then Moshe sprinkles the rest of the blood on the people as the seal of the brit, of the covenant. Literally, he makes a dam brit, or brit dam. He makes a covenant of blood. Then Moshe, Aaron, Nadav, Avihu, and the elders go up the mountain where they, quote, see Hashem, under whose feet is a sapphire brick, whose essence, says the Pasuk, is as pure and bright as the purest heaven. What is going on here? This is something, you know, that you might encounter after eating some funny mushrooms. You can't make this up. How does it connect to the Sedra? So to me, the message is clear as day. I suggest the Torah is telling us that God is particularly affected by the blood of the young people, whose deaths serve as an atonement for the entire nation. In their merit, the brit, the covenant between us, like the brit milah, the circumcision, which is also sealed with blood, that is eternally upheld by the Almighty, no matter how far we may stray from this initial na'aseh v'nishma. These are the angels the Pasuk is referring to. But exactly who are these young people of Israel who protect us, who embody the noble attributes of courage and mesirat nefesh, whose blood is being sprinkled on the nation at large? I suggest that, for me, it's very clear. This is no other than the proud young men and women who wear the uniform of the IDF, who selflessly place their lives on the line every day to defend Am Yisrael. And Hashem's name is in each and every one of these children. It is in their merit, I'm absolutely convinced, that we continue to frustrate the evil designs of millions of our enemies who would, God forbid, destroy us. In the zchut of these young people, the yeshivot flourish, the tourists visit when there's no pandemic, and the land blooms. These are the angels in green kids who trade their school bags for their M16s, and they are really, in a sense, the great angels, the tzaddikim of this generation. Rashi cites a medrash that the sparkling sapphire brick under Hashem's throne was there to remind him of the bricks that we made as slaves and the pain and suffering we endured in Egypt, especially when the cruel Egyptians would place Jewish babies in the wall when their parents' quota of bricks was not fulfilled. Each time Hashem starts to lose patience with Bnei Israel, whenever we fall short in our fulfillment of the mitzvot, such as those in our Parsha, Hashem takes out that brick, says the Medrash, and he looks at the brick and he remembers the sacrifice that we made, how we suffered, but nevertheless wanted to still remain faithful to Hashem. And when he sees that brick, his midat rachamim, his attribute of mercy, takes hold, and he decides to forgive us. He suppresses that impulse to punish us, and he thinks of our devotion to him even in the toughest of times. And for him, that is an emunah of faith, which shines like a precious gem, like sapphire. So in reality, the end of this Parsha, this story that seems so wild and incomprehensible, is really a kind of party bottom line, and it's not so different in tone from the 53 mitzvot enumerated earlier. It's continuing the same theme. Be sensitive, be appreciative of others, and show mercy to others, especially those who serve us or risk their lives for us. Those people who evoke the mercy of Hashem, because just as we show mercy, God must also show mercy. These special individuals who embody Mesirat Nefesh and courage, they are the heavenly bricks from which this great nation of ours, Am Yisrael, is built. I wish everybody a Shabbat Shalom, and with God's help, it will be a month of Bemet, Simcha, and Hashem will bring that Rachamim, that mercy, open up the society and banish the pandemic, and we can return to hopefully an even better way of life than we had before, after appreciating what it's like to spend a year since last Purim, leading a much more constricted and challenging daily life.
Amen.
So,
Shabbat Shalom. Thanks very much. It was beautiful.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I enjoyed it so much.
Thank you. I enjoyed having you. So I wish everybody Shabbat Shalom, Chodesh Tov. And I think we're going to try to squeeze. We're going to try to squeeze in next week as well at 6:15. The week after that is actually Purim, so we won't have a shiur that night. But then we'll decide exactly where we'll move the time to as it gets later, and we have to free up the room for Mincha and Arvit. But I will keep you posted as to what the time will be. But next week, I think we should be able to squeeze in one more week at 6:15, and hope that will be amenable to everybody.